Okay.
All right, what's up, everybody? We are live. Welcome. We're here for the NBA Finals, Game 1, Boston Celtics, Dallas Mavericks. And we're here to talk about DFS, maybe some bets as well, some underdog fantasy picks, everything you need for Game 1, NBA Finals. We had quite the wait. We're going to have quite the wait in between games as well. But welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy. I am joined by our lead NBA analyst, Chuck Silver, best ball extraordinaire. Chuck, man, it's always good to do streams with you, especially for a big of a slate as Game 1 Finals. What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I've been looking forward to our final streams together. We had some pretty good ones last season, so hope we can keep that up this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to do here, we're going to talk about DraftKings, about FanDuel. We'll break the game down from a high level. We'll talk about some underdog fantasy picks as well. This is a live stream, and we'll be here for 30 minutes or so, depending on the number of questions that we get. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat to the right of the YouTube screen here, and we will answer them along the way. And we're going to try to do these live streams, schedule permitting, for all of the finals games. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see if we got Jose in the chat. Tom Boyle, our NBA manager, is in the chat as well. Justin, what's up, guys? We appreciate you stopping in. And if you don't have questions, just say hi in the chat. We'll happily answer your questions here. So, Chuck, let's just start from a high level. On screen here, I have the DraftKings contest lineup screen for 1 million to first. We get these contests once a year during the NBA Finals, the biggest showdown contest you'll find for NBA, and we'll go over some strategy here as well. But just your initial thoughts, if for those of our viewers who have tickets or are planning on just throwing some entries into this contest.
Well, so when I first started looking at the pricing seems pretty good across the board. I think Derek Lively is probably the one inefficiency that I see. He seems like he's the guy that the Mavericks want on the court over Daniel Gafford. And so, like in our the Occupy model today, we have Lively for 25.5 minutes, Gafford for 21.5. Lively is only showing 20% ownership in the flex on DraftKings. I thought it would be much higher, but that's probably the first spot I want to attack. And then the other thing is figuring out who we're playing at captain, because it's really hard to play, 3 stars in the same lineup, especially if you have one at captain. But some of the mid-range captains like Derek White, Drew Holiday, even like a PJ Washington or a Derek Lively at captain, those seem like pretty good mid-range options. Allow us to fit Luka and Jason Tatum, or Luka, Jaylen Brown, whatever combo you want to go, while still not punting the last 2 spots.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to pull up our NBA strategy guide. This is free on OccupyFantasy.com. We reference it a lot throughout the season. But we do have a single game and showdown section at the very bottom of the strategy guide. This is linked in the description, by the way, if you want to check it out as we're checking it out. And if you scroll down to the bottom, the single game strategy, DraftKings and FanDuel vary differently because of the lack of a salary multiplier. For FanDuel, oftentimes you need the highest score in your MVP. You do need the highest score in your MVP spot. But when looking at these big ass contests like these, Chuck, we've actually seen, despite only having a handful over the last few years, we've seen a wide array of types of winning lineups, either solo win it, chop heavily, or chop lightly. And they all are pretty much covered in this uniqueness and larger contest section within the strategy guide, where it's either you leave some money on the table and a lower price player outscores a higher price player. You have a mid-tier or lower owned captain, as you just suggested, or you actually have, and we saw this in the very first million to first NBA showdown in the NBA Finals, you actually have a complete bench player who gets some garbage run or due to an injury, and they're at less than 1% or 1% owned, and they end up in the optimal lineup. So 3 different ways. Obviously, those are probably ranked in the order we want to think about this, but when you think about uniqueness and how many chops you might have in this contest, what are you thinking?
I mean, I want to go for first, right? I don't want to chop if I can help it. It's different for everybody. I have a handful of tickets for the big contest, so I'm just going to go pretty contrarian like I usually do and just try to get a solo first, or a minimal chop at least. You reminded me of, I think it was the Miami Heat finals a couple of years ago, where there was a winning lineup, and it was for sure chopped, but the winner was like the captain got 0 points. It was a min-price player, and it's just 5 stars in the game. They were the only ones who put up fantasy points. And so even with the 0 at the captain spot, it allowed you to fit in the 5 guys who actually scored points. And so I don't know if that's possible to happen here, but it's something to keep in mind with cheap guys, especially like Maxi Kleber or Jaden Hardy. Maybe you're playing for a blowout script, and those guys get more playing time. So that's another thing to think about too.
Would you go? And again, maybe you have more than 20 lineups, 150 lineups, or you have a couple and you don't care about your money, right? Like below the guys who we've actually seen get minutes in the conference finals, like Kleber, like Hardy, Exum, even below Hauser. Is it worth playing guys who didn't play outside of blowouts, or is it just if that happens, it happens, and you lose, so be it? Or you rather just ignore those guys at the very end of the bench?
Well, and like from a theory perspective, if there was a contest to do it, this is the one, right? Just massive, massive field. Half the prize pool basically goes to first place. But it's really hard for me to see any guys who didn't get minutes before entering the rotation now. Even with a massive blowout, I mean, it's the finals. I can't imagine like Luka and Kyrie are not going to play the fourth quarter unless it's literally a 40-point game. And so you're looking at only a few minutes for those guys who don't usually play. So I'm not sure if the risk is worth the reward. But if you find that min-price guy to play a captain and he scores 5 or 6 fantasy points, I mean, that could be enough sometimes.
Exactly. See, we got someone in the chat says, question on FanDuel, who should I have at MVP? Have one entry to put in the tournament. He's new to FanDuel. So yeah, first of all, check out the strategy guide that I have on screen here. The link is in the description, and you can read information on how to build a FanDuel lineup. Also, thanks to Boyle, our NBA manager in the chat, putting some single game notes in the chat for us. Tatum was MVP in 3 out of the 4 conference finals games. Full salary used in 3 out of the 4. Luka, unsurprisingly, MVP in 4 out of 5. So, Chuck, it really comes down to who are we playing at MVP on FanDuel? Is it Luka? Is it Tatum? Is there a minor chance it's someone else?
I mean, it could be like Kyrie as a long shot, but I mean, for example, if I had 100 lineups, I'd probably still run with a large majority of them with just Luka at MVP. He has the highest projection on the slate. It's the highest in the model by quite a bit. Like Tatum could definitely do it, but I think it's got to be Luka.
All right, so there you go in the chat. Play Luka. All right, let's keep it moving a little bit, Chuck, here, and talked about the rotation some. And I think the biggest question we have is Porzingis, who had the calf injury early in the playoffs, hasn't really played recently. He's expected back. We don't know if he's starting as of yet. Not going to be on the minutes limit, whatever that means. What are you seeing around the industry? What are your estimates for how much Porzingis plays, and how does he fit into the showdown slate?
So first off, the Occupy model has Kristaps Porzingis for 28.2 minutes. I think that sounds reasonable in my head. I was putting him at 29 before I looked at that. But saying he doesn't have a minutes limit, but we're not sure if he's starting, it's contradicting itself. And so I was going to mention Al Horford could be a pretty nice, probably overlooked spot in this game. But I mean, now if he's starting, Al Horford's going to be more popular than he was a few minutes ago. But we'll have to keep an eye on this. I was kind of down on Kristaps to begin with, but again, from like the theory perspective, if people are going to be nervous to play him because he hasn't played basketball in a month, then that makes me want to play him a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And he was actually popping a little bit when I was running some lineups through our lineup builder. And so that was intriguing to me just because, again, game theory play. So, all right, we talked about Luka. We talked about Tatum. Let's just talk about DraftKings captains really quickly here, Chuck. So obviously we have Luka as the highest projected captain, both as far as OF index and as far as projected ownership. Tatum comes in next. And then you have Jaylen Brown, Kyrie Irving in that 10 to 12% expected captain range. And then everybody else sub 10%. So why don't you just give me the lay of the land on how you're approaching captains if you're making multiple lineups in DraftKings?
So one of the things I like to think about with NBA Showdown captain is the best captain is the captain who most overperforms their projection. And so if Luka puts up 75 fantasy points, yeah, that's the guy who most overperformed his projection, even if he's projected for 60. But that has me looking at guys who have ceilings like Derek White, Drew Holiday, at a lower price. And so I think those guys are probably going to be most of my captains tonight, those two specifically. And then Luka, and I'm actually kind of fading Kyrie tonight, so I'm not really going to be getting to him at captain. And I guess it looks like I'm fading Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown captain too. Not necessarily recommending that. It's just I only have a few entries, and so I'm just going with what I want to get in there.
And for Kyrie, what's the reasoning behind the Kyrie fade with your limited entries at captain?
This is like so galaxy brain, but I feel like the best strategy for the Celtics is to lock Kyrie up, let Luka do whatever he wants, which is going to be more difficult if Kyrie is non-existent over on the wing. But in the 2 games they played, now keep in mind it's really hard to gather like inferences from the first two games because the lineups were different. Dallas did not have PJ Washington. They didn't have Dan Gafford, and they didn't, or I should say, they didn't have the starting lineup with Derek Jones. So they didn't have the starting lineup, which was one of the best teams on defense and offense after they started using it. But from, let me pull up the game. So the first time they met this season was January 22nd, and they kind of locked Kyrie up. I'm trying to pull up the stats here. Sorry, I just went away.
No, take your time, Chuck. And Chris in the chat is saying anyone without a projection in the model who could play, depending on the game script. Tim Hardaway. Do you think Tim Hardaway could play in this series, Chuck, or in game one?
If you have a bunch of entries, or if you're playing the million, you want to take the shot. I think that he's the one guy who could just come off the bench and hit 3 straight threes, but it's more likely that he just doesn't play at all or plays a couple minutes and does nothing. But that's definitely a guy who is not in the model that could end up making a difference because he's so cheap, especially if you're playing like a Luka captain lineup.
Sure. That totally makes sense. Okay. Someone in the chat said the volume difference between our mics is astronomical. Apologies. The first time Chuck and I have recorded in a while here. Let me know which one needs to be higher or lower. Whoever's listening, let me know, and I'll adjust it here on the back end. So, okay, let me see. Samuel says Mavs being the underdog will be better using more Mavericks players to be different, maybe like 4 on DraftKings or maybe 3 on FanDuel. All right. Someone said Chuck is really loud, so I'll turn Chuck's down here. So hopefully we can get this right. And then once Chuck speaks again, you guys let me know if that's the case. But what about, so yeah, we haven't really talked about stacking, and we don't really necessarily think about it that way in NBA, but 4 players from one team, 2 from another. And I know, Chuck, you and I even talked about this in the last NBA finals, where it's not like NFL Showdown, where if we play 4 underdogs compared to 2 favorites, generally that's an underused construction. Really, in NBA, it's just about projections, right? If a team is a 15-point underdog, but they have a missing player and all the values are on their side, it makes sense to play a 5-1 underdog stack because of who we expect to score points and what their prices are. How do the prices and how does the spread and perceived projections of these two teams, are there any choices to be made consciously about stacking number of players from one team?
This might just be how my lineups turned out, but in the builder, I'm like exactly even on 3 3s and 4 2s for both sides. I have more 5-1s on Boston side, and I have more Dallas captains. And so we get more Dallas captains, but more 5-1s with Boston. So that could even be Luka at captain with 5 Boston guys, and then the rest are just very, very balanced.
Fair enough. And it turns out my mic volume on my system was down, so I just turned that back up. You guys let me know if we sound good now. Thanks to that. Jose's asking who's my preferred captain. I have like 15 entries tonight just via tickets from random contests, UFC, and even NFL I had some tickets from. I'm still undecided. I'm going to pick Chuck's brain here. But I do like the second tier captain route. I will probably have some Luka, and then I like those guys that Chuck mentioned as far as Lively, Drew Holiday, and Derek White. Now they're saying I sound like you now, Chuck, so hopefully that's a good thing. So I think we're good now.
As long as we're on the same level.
Yeah, as long as we're on the same level. And just really quickly, Chuck, I didn't talk to you about this. It has nothing to do with NBA right now. I just want to take a quick second. One of my good friends passed away this week. She was 33, which is incredibly young, and no one should have to deal with that. So I know, Chuck, you and I even talked about after Grayson Murray's passing that, checking on people, and you never know what's going to come next. So I just want to tell everyone out there, just hug your loved ones, and you don't know what's going to come. So just make sure you cherish those people around you.
Hey, appreciate you. Yeah, same.
So, all right, guys, if you have questions, 7:15, we'll be here for 15 more minutes. Go ahead and throw them in the chat. Chuck, what's next up? What do you want to talk about here?
So looking at the rotation from the January 22nd game, that's the first time Mavs and Celtics met. The Mavericks had Luka, Kyrie with Derek Jones in the starting lineup, but they also had Josh Green and Derek Lively. I don't know if I just repeated myself, but in that game, we saw Josh Green play 38 minutes, Luka play 40, Kyrie play 36, and Tim Hardaway play 32 off the bench. So there's just nothing to get from this Mavericks rotation. And then on that point about Kyrie, he put up 23, 6 and 3 that game, which is a fine game for Kyrie Irving.
Sure.
And on the other side, the Celtics ran an extremely tight rotation with all the starters playing 30-plus minutes. Kristaps Porzingis was out. They had Al Horford starting at center. And then they ran Peyton Pritchard, Cornette, Hauser off the bench. And then the second time they met this season, the Mavericks did have Gafford, but they started Lively. He played 23 minutes. Gafford played 6, and Kleber came in for 20 minutes. And so even though Kleber hasn't really been in the rotation in the playoffs, that's a guy who I'm keeping an eye on just at a cheap price. He can come in and hit a few threes, get a couple rebounds. And I don't know, if I had to put money on it, I would say he's in the winning lineup in one of the finals games. I don't know that it's tonight, but I want to get exposure to him throughout the series. And then, I mean, for the Mavericks, it was mostly a similar rotation. Again, Josh Green started. He's kind of, I mean, he's a bench guy now. He's in the rotation, but I'm not too interested in him. And then from Boston side again, they ran a tight rotation. With Al Horford off the bench, Kristaps played 29. Al Horford played 28 minutes, and so they shared the court at the same time. We'll have to see if they're interested in doing that tonight. It's really hard to tell with Kristaps Porzingis not playing for a month. And then I also went back and looked at Boston's rotation the last time they were in the finals 2 years ago, and they played a very tight rotation then. Jaylen Brown, 39 minutes a game. Jason Tatum, 41. Al Horford, 32 as the starter with Robert Williams in that bench role at 26 minutes. So they went 2 bigs in the finals then too. And so, I mean, it makes me think like maybe we could play Al Horford and Porzingis in the same lineup. I doubt anyone's going to do it. In my few lineups, maybe it's not something I get to, but if I had a few more, I might consider that. But again, it just hammers home that we want to play the guys that we know are going to be on the court for big minutes.
Absolutely. No, I mean, especially as the finals, we see rotations shrink a little bit. Starters get a few more minutes, and that's certainly probably the case here. Let's see. Brody says thoughts on Pritchard, declining minutes, or does he keep playing 20s? Just based on what Chuck has said, we likely see declining minutes as the starters play a little more. But what are your thoughts on Peyton Pritchard here, Chuck? Just really quickly, I'm in the model and I'm sorting by DraftKings value. For the members, you guys know what this is. For if you're not a member of OccupyFantasy.com, basically looks at their OF index, which is our proprietary ranking for a player, compares it to their DraftKings salary. And this really hits on what you were saying earlier, Chuck. Derek White, Drew Holiday are the best DraftKings values, so that lends more credit to them being the optimal captains. You look at the guys like Peyton Pritchard; he's all the way down at 6.3, ranks outside the top 12 on the slate. And of the values, Sam Hauser ranks the highest. But then it's Pritchard, Josh Green, Horford's low, Kleber's low, Hardy's low. So when you don't have really standout values, it does lead itself more, as we've been saying, to these mid-range captains.
Yeah, and it like with their ownerships being kind of spread out and all under 10% on those guys, it just makes me more interested in playing them. Hope to get that solo takedown. It is interesting to me that Al Horford's projected for 25 minutes and he's still projected as like such a terrible value.
Yeah.
Does the model take into account starters or not, or it's just pure minutes?
It does take into account starting, and it depends on coaching tendencies as well. Does a starter actually mean you're starting and playing starter minutes? So yes, it does. It does indeed do that. So Jesus says Tatum captain, fade Luka. So I know you said you're not doing that, Chuck, but what would be the argument if someone wanted to play Tatum at captain and fade Luka?
Just Luka puts up, I mean, I hate to put numbers, but like, let's say Luka puts up 55 fantasy points, Tatum puts up 60, Jaylen Brown puts up 45, Kyrie puts up 45, and one of the role players puts up 30 something, and Luka just doesn't separate enough from everyone else. So if I'm doing that, I'm not necessarily doing that because I think Luka's going to play poorly. It's because I think that everyone else is going to play well, and I guess it means Luka's going to play a little bit below what we expect.
Sure. Samuel says, will Hauser keep chucking threes? So Sam Hauser, you look at three-point attempts, averaging at least 2 per game throughout the playoffs, but oftentimes shooting 3 or more. So what's your response to
that? He shoots threes, and so if you've been watching the show all season, I love guys that just pull. He's been really bad in the playoffs shooting. He's shooting 33% from 3, which is bad for a guy who's only supposed to hit threes. 1 of 3.5 a game. He's playing 14 minutes a game in the playoffs. I think that went down a little bit in the previous series, but I have to imagine they're going to put him in there because how do the Mavericks win this series? They hit more threes than the Celtics. So if the Celtics, need to get someone going and they can get Sam Hauser in there for even 2 threes in a game, like that's pretty big to get that from your bench guy.
Absolutely. Speaking of bench guys, favorite bench guy, we're not going to count Lively as a bench guy, basically co-starter with Daniel Gafford. But if we look at Mavericks bench guys, do you have a favorite of that group, or is it just spread them all around and hope one of them hits?
So you could spread it around. Like Josh Green, Jaden Hardy are probably going to be on the court. We don't know what's going to happen with Maxi Kleber, but Kleber feels to me like the best guy that has the potential to hit a ceiling from that group.
Cool. Sounds good. All right, guys, it's 7:21. We'll be here for 9 more minutes. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We'll be doing this stream. I might not be on here. Chuck might not be on here, but we will have some sort of stream every game of the NBA Finals. So make sure you are subscribed here on YouTube. It is free to do so. You'll get notified when we go live, upload any videos, and you'll be notified when these NBA Finals streams are happening. So just click subscribe, free way to support the channel. If you like what you've seen so far, give us a thumbs up. Another free way to support the channel. Let's see here. All right, let's talk about FanDuel really quickly, Chuck. And we look at FanDuel value. It's Luka at the top, no surprise. Porzingis, the model is high on Porzingis tonight, so that is something that's interesting to me. Then it's Tatum, Irving. Obviously, it's more star heavy over on FanDuel, given their scoring system and their lack of a salary multiplier. All right, so let's say we're playing Luka at the top multiplier spot. Let's see here. I'm going to pull up the strategy guide just really quickly so people can see this. So if you look at MVP, star, and pro, who do you think is the most overlooked pro? That is the third multiplier spot. Generally, it's a third-tier player, sometimes a second-tier player, depending on pricing. But who do you think can have that outlier game as a second, third, fourth option tonight?
So I don't think we have any kind of ownership for the FanDuel Showdown, but I imagine like the guys that we like at DK Captain for cheap, Derek White and Drew Holiday, are going to be fairly popular in those spots. Because I imagine the most common starting way to start a lineup is going to be Luka at MVP and Jason Tatum at the star spot, right?
Yep.
And so I don't know, like who's a guy that could creep in there? PJ Washington, maybe. Like Al Horford, if you can fit Kristaps Porzingis with the salary, I'm not sure. But that's a tough one. Yeah, I think that's the spot where you can really get a little different because it just seems like Luka and Jason Tatum are just by far the most likely to end up in MVP and star.
Yeah, it does seem like the most likely outcome to me as well. All right, so we talked about DraftKings, we talked about FanDuel. Let's talk about Underdog Fantasy. If you haven't already, make sure you do sign up for Underdog if you're in an eligible state because one, they've upped the deposit match bonus to $250. You deposit $250, you get $250 in free bonus funds to whether it's play best ball drafts, which Chuck is streaming like 5 times a week, or it's to play in their pick'em contest, the straight up pick'ems or the pick'em champions. And it was just announced. I know you guys talked about it on the most recent best ball stream. They now have pick 8, which means you can do 8 player stats in a single slip up to 325 times your entry. Just really crazy. And there can be some big payouts. I know some people in the chat were asking about DraftKings Pick 6 as well. Similar concepts. And Chuck, Chris asked you last night or the night before if you had any early leans on NBA. But have you looked at the NBA props tonight? Any stand out to you from a high level?
Yeah, the ones that look good from like a numbers perspective. Even this is taking my feelings out. This is just what the stuff like the stats said. I got Kyrie lower than 37.65 fantasy points. Underdog lowered the line to 36.45 fantasy points. I don't know that I'd necessarily take that one. But they do still have PJ Washington lower than 24.25 fantasy points, which sounds good. And I paired those with Tanner Hook, pitcher for the Boston Red Sox at lower 37.5. So that's the one underdog entry that I have in today.
There you go. And you know it's a pure numbers play when you don't know how to pronounce the guy's name. So shout out to you, Chuck. I have been there before in many of sports. So again, if you guys haven't signed up, Underdog Fantasy, use promo code OCCUPY. That'll get you that $250 deposit match bonus. And again, we're doing best ball drafts all days of the week. I know it's only June, but NFL will be here shortly. And you can do pick 6, pick 8, pick 3, whatever you want, any sorts of pick 'em. Over on Underdog Fantasy for the NBA Finals, one of the best places to play fantasy contests for NBA. So, Chuck, we got 5 minutes left. You guys have more questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. Junior, what's up, Junior? Longtime subscriber says, favorite guy cheaper than Horford on FanDuel. So if we sort by FanDuel pricing, Horford is 8,500. That gives us Derek Jones, Josh Green, Peyton Pritchard, Maxi Kleber, Sam Hauser, Jaden Hardy. So from Derek Jones all the way down to Jaden Hardy, who's your favorite of that group, Chuck?
Derek Jones, I think.
Yep, and he unsurprisingly will likely be the highest owned of that group because he does have the highest ceiling and minutes of those guys as well. So Derek Jones is the easy answer, Junior. Then it falls off a cliff after that. Let's see here, Chuck. If you had to guess, let's say there's a solo winner tonight. What do you think is the most likely reason? Is it salary leftover? Is it an unsurprising captain or surprising captain? Is it a low-owned flex play? Is it a weird construction? What does your guts tells you ends up as the unique key that you need tonight?
Like this seems like a difficult slate to bank a solo win in this contest, but it's got to be some combination of like a captain under 10% owned. So maybe Derek White, Drew Holiday, Derek Lively, PJ Washington, or Gafford goes off, and but he's projected for more ownership, which doesn't really make sense to me right now. But let's say like it's flipped and everyone has ownership projections wrong, where Lively comes in way higher owned than Gafford. Gafford could be in there. Just some combination of the bench guys too getting in there to allow you to fit in Luka captain. Like if Jaden Hardy and Kleber go off, or Jaden Harvey and Sam Hauser have good games, relative to their salary. It's tough though because Luka captain could still definitely win. Can't imagine it'd be really hard to have a solo win with Luka captain though.
Yeah, you would need somebody like, let me see here. I don't even know who even would play in a blowout. Xavier Tillman, is he playing? I saw he got interviewed. Would he be? I don't even know who the 11th and 12th guys are. So it would probably have to be one of those guys to get in.
I recall Xavier Tillman being on the court once in the conference finals. I know he was on more than once, but he just looked awful and like he just did not belong. So I don't know if they're going to go to him, especially with Kristaps back.
He said in the interview that I saw, and it was unrelated to NBA Finals, they asked him who he would least likely want to sit to on a flight. And he said it was Luke Cornett because the guy never stops talking. And Tillman said, "I'm tired, man. I got 3 kids." So maybe Tillman's inability to sleep led to him not belonging on an NBA court. So Jose says, favorite cheap Celtic. Really, we only have Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard as the options, right, Chuck? Is there another one? Or who do you prefer between those guys?
I don't think I'm getting to much of the cheap Boston guys. I like the cheap Dallas guys, though, like all the guys I keep mentioning. But for Boston, I don't even like Peyton Pritchard, so it's tough. Like I'm fine with Al Horford, but we only have three bench guys in the model for Boston. Yeah. And like I mentioned, Sam Hauser could come in and hit a couple threes, but so could half the other bench guys in the series. So
right, exactly. And Pritchard's priced $3,400. He's not your 2K guy. That does give you less wiggle room. Yes, he's a little more dynamic than has the ball in his hands more than Sam Hauser, but at $3,400, he needs to do a little more, and that makes it a lot tougher on entering the optimal lineup. All right, guys, 2 minutes, final questions. If you don't get them in, you can join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. The link is in the description. We would love to have you sweat out the games with you. And the Occupy model you saw on screen, I'll bring it back up just now, ranks every player on FanDuel and DraftKings with DraftKings projected ownership. Our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 lineups on FanDuel and DraftKings using these model values and using a lot of the rules that we've talked about on this show. I'm going to hop off after this, get my rules input, and run some lineups as well. And the strategy guide I showed on screen. Again, it's something I was literally looking at before the show. I go back to it every time I play a contest just to refresh my memory on what we need to do in NBA Showdown contest. And that is fully free, by the way. That link is in the description, so make sure you read that before you build your lineups tonight. Chuck, I'll give you some final thoughts here. I'll give you the floor as we close out the show.
So I'm thinking about that question you just asked about like what possible unique lineups could win tonight. And I'm wondering if enough people are going to go very heavy Dallas 5-1 Dallas Boston builds with maybe even the one is a player like Peyton Pritchard or Drew Holiday, Derek White, whatever. If Dallas ends up blowing Boston out, and I'm rooting for Dallas tonight. Got my Luka jersey on.
Oh yeah.
But that could be a possibility there too.
You are a Derek White fan tonight for best ball, is that right?
I'm a very big Derek White fan. Yeah, I have one entry in the finals of the Dance Underdog contest. That's their NBA best ball playoff contest. I went through and counted. I think there's less than 20 teams that can field a full roster. And I have the 4 main Mavericks out of 350 or 380.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's just these playoff best ball contests are amazing. And so I have the 4 Mavericks guys plus Derek White and Drew Holiday. I'm sorry, I don't have I have Luka, PJ, and Gafford and Derek White and Drew Holiday. And so I am rooting against Kyrie, but like the reason I'm saying I don't love Kyrie tonight is not just because I'm rooting against him. I try to take my bias out of that.
Sure. So you should be guaranteed top 20 just based on being able to fill out a full roster. What's the top prize for that?
$50K for first, and I'm pretty sure the winner is already determined because he somehow got Luka, Tatum, and Kyrie on a team, and he can fill out a full roster. Guy's named Scott Blumstein. He actually won the World Series of Poker main event in 2018, so I can't imagine there's any funny business going on, but it seems like an impossible roster to get just based on the way drafts went. And you figured that's if he gets to the finals, which he did, then it takes down the whole contest. But I'm expecting top 10, just based on the players that I have and the 5 available that the other people have. And I could have miscounted. Maybe there's more than 20, but I'm expecting top 10.
At FBI, at New York State AG, at Underdog Fantasy, please investigate how this guy got those on his roster. But like you said, probably no funny business, but interesting to see. And this is a very off-topic subject, Chuck, but seemingly we get a lot of these crossovers, right? Whether it's poker, if you listen to the guys on the Emotional Bankroll podcast I hosted, or just in best ball, you see different crossovers, right? And it shows that when you think about things probabilistically, those skills translate into other contests, games of chance, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to just making decisions against other humans, peer-to-peer gaming. And like pick six is my favorite thing in the world after DFS. And so just anything where I'm making decisions against other people, poker, DFS, pick six, or whatever it is, I'm going to feel pretty good about my chances. Just I'm going to put in the work over other people. And like if you're watching these shows, you're already doing more work than most of the people playing these things. So.
That is for damn sure. And that is a great way to close out the show. So follow Chuck on Twitter at ChuckSilverDFS. I'm at Brian Jester FF. You can find all of our content at Occupy Fantasy on Twitter. And again, OccupyFantasy.com is where you can get the articles and the tools that I've referenced throughout the show. One final ask, if you're still here and you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Less than 50% of our viewers do so. It's just a free way to show support. Just click subscribe. I never notice when I'm watching other channels that I watch, even unsports related channels, I really don't subscribe that often. So, it's a great way to support. So I've been subscribing more often to other channels just to show that support. You can do the same for us. And a thumbs up is, you don't want to subscribe? That's cool. Just give us a thumbs up, please. That's all we ask for. So for Chuck, I'm Brian. Thank you for listening. Everybody, good luck and enjoy Game 1 of the NBA Finals.